Hey everybody, Scout Crafty here again. It's Wednesday, midweek Wednesday, and we got a couple things to get to today. But before we started, when I used to work, to keep things interesting and keep conversation going, every once in a while I would take a poll and we would go around the entire shop. I would have a list of paper and I would usually ask a yes or no question or something like that to take a poll to see how people would react. And I was always a lot of times surprised that the poll didn't come out exactly like I thought it would. I thought people would definitely say one way and they went another way. And I'll give you an example of a question I would ask a lot of times during the poll. For example, I would go up and say, if you could know 3 months before you were going to die that you were going to die, like, you know, all of a sudden 3 months before you were going to die, you didn't know how you were going to die, you just knew that in 3 months exactly you were going to die. Now my question is, would you want to know or would you not want to know? And we got some very interesting answers, you know, again, different from my own opinion. Now I will tell you how I feel about it, and I want you to think about it, and we'll get to it at the end of the video, and I'll give you an example of why I feel so strongly about my answer. So think about that. If you could know 3 months before you were going to die that you were going to die, would you want to know yes or no? So with that, let's get to today's project. You know, last week we did that Stanley number 1460 and I had such a good time doing it. I just felt like doing these today, and I'm going to see if I could squeeze out 2 of them. What they are, as you can see, is we have that round, very unusual round crowbar. You don't see them. And then we have this, and I always like these type of wide chisels. And you don't have to use it. You could use it as a pry bar if you wanted to. You know, there's a lot of things you could use this for. But a lot of times they would use masonry chisels, things like that. But again, you could taper this to be whatever you wanted. You could see here the tip here. It's a little bit, you know, rounded over, but not crazy. So, you know, it's not too bad, but we're going to have to work with that. And the tip looks good. You know, these were good steel, you know, the vintage ones were good steel. So we got that. And then we have this here round crowbar. And you could tell by the wear on here that this was used a lot, but it has no damage. And I'll show you how we could tell a good steel. Now, this is the only markings I could see on here. I don't know if that's a markings or I looked at the other side, so it's not like something gripped it, but it's either a, is that a T, W, and that's a, oh, you know, you'll do better than me, you know, looking at that. So I don't know what those markings are, but, you know, we're going to just clean this up because we want to make this a user. And this one here, we want to do because nobody else does these. They take it for granted, and nobody ever makes these pretty. So let's try and do that. Okay, now it's important to remember the forging on these cold chisels are so hard, and they have such a hard scale on them. If you try and go at it with a flap disc, you'll never do it, you know. So what I find is you have to use one of these thick grinding wheels, and you have to get through all that scale. Now the problem is you could see the finish that the grinding wheel leaves on there, and it's you know, look at it, it's not bad, but it's just, you know, not what we want. So now after you do that, then you got to go to your flap disc, and that'll even all that out. So that's what we want to do, but you have to do this first or else you'll be there for hours and hours and hours. We got about half an hour into this because we use that. about 2 hours into this project, and it came up to me. A good friend of mine, Trusty Rusty, you know him in the comments, he was asking, he just got a buffer and he's having a great time, but he says he sent about 3 or 4 tools across the shop, and that is par for the course. Anytime you're using a buffer, it takes a little bit of a learning curve, and you will send items across the shop. I know a lot of you are laughing out there because we've all done it. And the worst part is when you send like a nut or a screw that you only have one of, and it goes, when it takes off, all of a sudden you stop and you listen and you hear bing, bing, bing. It's like it goes to the Never Never Land. So let me just give you a tip or two real quick with the buffer to stay safe. Okay, it's voiceover time. Now, when you're using the buffing wheel, you want to go between 9 o'clock and 6 o'clock. That little quarter section, that's the only place you should touch your items. And the reason that is because when its wheel is spinning and you're grinding or something, if you ever do touch something like the top edge here of that thing, it will flip out and away, you know. That's why we only use that 1/4 section of the wheel. And it's important that if you ever have to use the other side, you never get too close to the top edge, because that top edge of anything will grab it and flip it out away from you and across the shop. So that's important. And also make sure you get a really good grip on whatever you're using. That's really important, because again, you're fighting that buffing wheel. You got to use a lot of pressure for it to work, and it builds up heat. Now, when it builds up heat, it's important that you constantly dip it in water until it's cool, because one of the big problems you'll have, and I've had this, is sometimes you'll grip the chisel lightly because it's so hot. You don't want to really hold it too much, and that's when you have problems. So always get a good grip on it, and remember, we want to use that section between 9 and 6. You don't want to use any other part of the wheel because it will flip it away. Now, you know my favorite part. Remember what these 2 bars look like before we started. And we're calling this project done. Obviously, the next day, had a lot of fun doing these. Let's talk about them one at a time, because these are super great tools. Everybody should have them. Let's go start with this. Okay, first let's start off with one of the most underrated, underused tools that you can find in your arsenal, and that is the Mason's Chisel, or the Brick Chisel, or Masonry Chisel. They go by a bunch of different terms. And what it is, it's kind of a cold chisel that has a convex style tip on it. And you could see here the beauty of this, the wide edge on here. Again, you could see we didn't do it to a full polish, but we got it really nice compared to what it was. And you can use this for so many things. Like I said, it's a totally underused tool, and people think just because, you know, it's only meant to be used for masonry or something, you could use this for so many things. And I want to give you an example of some of the things that you can use it for. First of all, let's take a look at what we did here. We took it down. Again, this is always good practice. It's a hexagon a profile on here. We did the back up nice. We just touched the edge. We didn't make it, obviously not sharp, but it's sharp enough to do the jobs that we want to do. Now, because this is a convex edge, it's really superior in splitting wood, things like that. It's good for prying, for getting in there, wedging. It's tempered so that it's super strong, but it won't chip on you and break. Some of these chisels, this shaft came down to here and made a little bit of a bump. So, because you're only supposed to use the top 2 inches in masonry work, so you'll see a lot of them with this kind of bump here. But with these older style chisels, when you could find them and you got this beautiful transition all the way up, this is great for prying, for separate. I mean, think about all the things you could use. Let me show you some of the things you could use this for. Now, sometimes you might be doing some work outside or something, and you need to scribe materials. It could be rubber, could be vinyl, could be plastics, you know, something like that. And, you know, you might not have something that you can use like a straight edge or something. And a lot of times you can take your, again, your Mason's chisel, put it flat against here, hold it, and get a nice scribe, because you got that corner there, and it makes a nice line you could see here on many different materials, you know. And depending on how sharp you make this, you can, you know, you can almost cut through whatever you want to. Now, like I said, the splitting ability of this is also great, because if you had to split something here, we're going to take a piece of 2x4, just put it into the vise here. Now I'm going to use a soft blow hammer not to mess up the back here, but you could see if you had to split a piece of wood, you could just take it here and just, you know, how quickly that'll give you a quick split of wherever you want it to go. You know, if you could shave off some, you could take a little bit off at a time. Here, we're going to do it again. You could see one shot. It's just fabulous, you know. It's a lot of fun. If you had to do a rough lap joint, if you're outside or something, you could get the chisel. You know, again, how could you beat that? Another thing is, you know, this thing has such a great cutting ability. If you're in the field and you had to cut a piece of, like, here we have plastic pipe, you would take it here just on just a piece of backing board and hammer it down. And you could see it, although it sends it across the room, you could see here that we were able to cut through the pipe with no problem. You could do that with aluminum, brass, copper, things like that. I'm telling you, these things are worth having. Next up, we have our crowbar. And now, first of all, let me discuss one thing. I call this a crowbar, but one of the subscribers pointed out a very good point. He said, you know, a crowbar is actually like a straight bar, something similar to this, with just a little up switch at the end. Now I'll put a picture here. This is what a crowbar actually is. And this here, with a hook on it, was traditionally known as a wrecking bar. But the funny thing is, and in the trades everywhere on the Northeast, as far as I know, everybody would call this a crowbar, you know. And even if you Google crowbar, this is the shape that comes up. You don't get the traditional crowbar. So I always, what do you call it where you live? I'm sure the guys in the UK, they got some kind of crazy name for it. But what do you call this shape with the hook and the little nail puller in it? Do you call it a wrecking bar? You call it a crowbar? You call it a pry bar? What do you call it? But anyway, this one here is just beautiful, isn't it? First, let's take a look at what we did. We, you know, round items, you know, are always a little challenge to get, but this came out really nice. And the reason I was so taken by this bar is because, first of all, it came with the other lot of, you know, the great tools that we got from possibly LV. So whoever LV was had this, and he had this. So this guy was a tool man, whoever it was, because I got the lot on eBay. And what I loved about this, it was so worn from the hands, from use. So this guy used this a lot. It was perfectly straight. It wasn't bent at all. And another thing, Gene Paul brought up a very good point. He says, you know, as far as the round crowbars go, because you never see them round, they're always either hexagon or octagon. How come, you know, with the, he says, how do you forge it? He's never, you know, you don't really think of, when you think of forgings, you think of a shape that, you know, has something like this with flats on it. You never think of forging around. And that's a good question, you know. Was this forged? Was this forged? Was this bent, just a rod and tempered? Who knows? But it is a good steel, and I'm going to show you how we check the steel. I do have some other round crowbar. My favorite crowbar is what I call, this is probably more of a wrecking bar. See this one here? And you see this here? And this was expensive. I think this was $80, which is crazy because crowbars are cheap. This is titanium. Titanium, rust-free, super light, super heavy duty. Yeah, these are hard to find. It took me like a year to find this thing. Isn't that sweet? And but you can get regular. And the reason I find it funny, if you call it a wrecking bar, you can get the traditional, this shape bar in many different sizes. Now you can get them as little as like 9 inches. Would you call this a wrecking bar? I mean, can you imagine showing up, you know, to a construction site and say, let's start ripping things down with this little bar? So I don't know. It depends on what you call it. But let me show you how I found to check some steels, and let me show you what's interesting about this. Now, it's somewhat difficult to tell how good a steel is until you start working with it or grinding on it, but one test that we did years ago was you tap on it, and this might be a good steel, but it might be tempered wrong, you know, so when you go to use it, it bends right away. But here, I'm going to show you the tap test. Listen to the tone that this makes when I tap it. Now, That's lovely, isn't it? You anvil guys, you know what I'm talking about. You hear that ring? That's just beautiful. Let's see what the titanium bar sounds like. Now here we have the titanium bar on there. Let's see what it sounds like. This is awesome. Okay, so that was a lot of fun, and I got to tell you something. You know, I'm honest with you. I always come clean with certain things. I literally got goosebumps when I hit that titanium bar. Is there something wrong with me? I don't know what it is. That was so cool. I mean, to think of how hard and tempered that is to ring like that, you know, in the shape. She gave me goosebumps, you know. Anyway, to finish up, let me talk about, remember that poll we were talking about in the beginning of the show? I chose that. I said, of course, I would want to know 3 months in advance, because I said, you know, I would want to prepare and, you know, and take care of some loose ends that I have here. I don't want to leave anybody with a mess, you know. But you wouldn't believe how many guys where I work said they wouldn't want to know. They said, no, I wouldn't want to know. I would be freaking out for 3 months and this and that. And I said, are you sure? And they said, no way. And I said, you know what's going to happen? I said, after work, you're going to go and get a burrito at 7-Eleven, a day-old burrito. You're going to, you know, wash that down with a slug of soda, go home, and you're going to die. I said, me, for the 3 months before I die, I'm going to be eating the best foods and watching every sunset and just, you know, finishing up that bucket list, whatever I have left. And I said, you know, that's for me. But what do you think? Would you want to know, or would you not want to know? Let me know. Just a yes or a no in the comments, and we'll know what you're talking about. Anyway, thanks so much for tuning in. Hope you have a great day. Take care now. Bye-bye. This is awesome.